Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Gallinaro. I'm one of the co-presidents for the Rowan 3D Printing Club. And today during this workshop, I'm going to be showing you guys a little bit about Cura and some of the settings and how it works. And I'm also going to be demonstrating some 3D printed models that I have on the other video camera right now, just to give you guys a little insight of, a little exposure to 3D printing. So right here to start off, this is what it looks like when you open up Cura for the first time. Basically, you're going to want to either import a model that you've been working on either in a specific CAD software, such as, for example, Onshape or Solidworks. So to start off, I'm going to import a model that I have designed, and I'm just going to find it real quick. So the model is obviously, Halloween's coming up, so designed a quick pumpkin. So I'm going to be showing you guys basically just a rundown of everything, nothing too extensive with the settings. I myself have not played with every single setting, but I've played with only a few settings that are useful that you would need to get started with 3D printing. So right here in the left-hand corner, that was to import a model, which is this little folder over here. Then if the next step is to obviously select what type of printer you have. So you can obviously add more printers, but for now I have either the Creality CR10 or the Ultimaker 2 Plus, which is what we have at the 3D Printing Club. Where we're located is in the engineering hall, and that's the printers that they have available that we're using with them. So right now it's selected as the Creality CR10, which obviously has a huge build plate volume, a lot of space to work with. So I'm going to switch over to the Ultimaker 2 just to switch up and show you guys that, with each printer, it is a little different. And as you can see, the volume decreased a little bit because of the size of the Ultimaker. So now, pretty much you can slice this model right now, standing up like that. But that would not be the best or most optimal way of going about this, because if you were to slice it like that, it may increase the time. Depending on your infill settings and other factors too. I personally, if I see a model like this, I would like to flip it and rotate it, which I'm going to get to in a second. But now I'm going to show you guys this left-hand panel over here. The first one on the top is to set the position of your model inside the build plate area. Right now I have it set to at the origin, which is 0, 0, 0. You could obviously move it around to any specific spot you're thinking or that you would want to do. One tip that I recommend is that I recently just found out about actually is if I were to move this into the negative space of the build plate, the model would actually start printing about halfway or about halfway through the model. So that whatever is on the positive z-axis going up is what will be printed. So it's useful if you want to do like cutaway models. So say you have like, for instance, an apple or something, and you want to see what's inside it, but you don't have a software to cut it in half. And it's already a pre-done model. You could just put the apple halfway down, and it will actually split in half for you. So it's one way to manipulate that setting just to get an extra feature out of it. So next, here's the next setting, which is basically to change your measurements and also scaling. One thing that I like is it does have a feature called uniform scaling, which is very useful when you don't want to, really go crazy with measurements, or even, say you mess up on something or something doesn't look right. You can scale everything to the same size, and it will auto calculate it for you from whatever measurements you currently have. So if I were to set this to about 50% for scaling, it would automatically scale all those measurements to about 50%. Which makes it very useful when you're trying to do things very quickly or scale up or scale down things. So I'm going to reset this back to 100. Currently, and also if you uncheck uniform scaling, you could change each of these individually, and you could also change the scaling for each axis. One thing that I did run into when I was doing the workshop with a few of the students was that someone suggested, is it possible to change this instead of millimeters to inches? And I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. I've always worked in millimeters, so I haven't really had that issue. And I believe that Cura automatically, so say you were to make a part that was in inches, and when you upload it to the Cura, it would automatically convert it to millimeters. I believe that's how it works. I'm not too sure, but I'm gonna look into it and I'll definitely, get back to that student, and if anything, I might shoot like an update email that, attached to this. So the next setting is very useful. It, helps you rotate your model. And that's what we're exactly going to do here. We're going to rotate this model by grabbing on the red loop going around and rotating it 90 degrees, which will lay the model flat for us, which makes it a lot easier to print. Now, the other thing is there's 3 more settings down here, and I'm still playing around with them. I haven't really experimented with, all 3 of them. I've only experimented with this one over here, and you can play around with different infills and stuff, but, basically the main 3 that you'll be using are the top ones over here. That's the primary ones you'll be using. So moving on, the middle bar over here is pretty standard. You're going to want to select what type of material you're using. Most likely it's going to be PLA if you're starting out with 3D printing, but if you're going to want to move on to more complex projects or more, I guess, trying to make your models do specific things, or maybe withstand specific environments, you might want to move up to ABS or even stronger materials like nylon and stuff like that. But you're obviously not limited to what's here. You can add your own materials and whatever comes to mind. So next is the nozzle size. So pretty much nozzles are pretty standard for what printer you have. I believe on the Ultimakers it is 0.4 millimeter, and also on the CR10s is 0.4 millimeter. So that's like a setting you don't really have to play around with. You could just leave it what it's at. I would think that later on in the future, if you would want specific quality adjustments for your prints, then you would obviously go with a different diameter size for the nozzle. But for now, it's going to be set to 0.4 millimeter. Okay. So next, this is actually the main menu. So this is like the simplified version of it. It just gives you a brief overview of everything. It doesn't really get into the nitty-gritty of everything. This is basically what you'll be using, what I would recommend using when starting out. The other settings, you might want to leave them alone until you do more research on them. So starting out, this is actually the layer heights. So layer heights can be thought of almost like if you're building a brick wall or something like that. And, how tall do you want those bricks in between each layer? That would be the height, or the layer height. So when you're looking at 0.2 millimeters over here, whatever's to the left of that will be a finer quality, which means there wouldn't be too much layer height difference, which means that your parts would come out a little bit smoother. And whatever's to the right of that would come out a little more rugged. You'd be able to see those layer heights. So generally, I would recommend for the CR10, it would be 0.15 millimeters. And for this current setting that I have for the Ultimaker, which was already preset by Cura, it recommends 0.1 millimeter, which is pretty standard for this printer. Next is going to be infill, which is pretty important thing when working with models. 0% infill could be thought of almost like a soccer ball with no air on the inside. You just have a shell. So that's one way to look at it. And 100% infill could be looked at as like a whole cake. It's heavy. You could feel it. I don't know. Pretty much, it's like almost like the density. Like, how dense do you want this object to be, with lines going through it. You can obviously play around with numbers. You don't have to, stick with, increments of, 20, 40, 60, 80. You can do in between. So like, for example, 22% infill. So one feature that you probably see right there is gradual infill. I have not used that personally. So I believe the way it works is as you have a print and you're starting to go up, it starts to get a little bit higher and increases the infill as you go higher in the print in height. I believe that's how it works, so don't quote me on that. I'm not too sure. So next would be supports. Supports are pretty much can almost be thought of as going over a bridge. You have like this overhang. So you're going over a bridge. And you have these 2 columns going in between. Your printer's got to print in from here to here, these 2 points. But the thing is, when it's printing, it may need a little bit of help because it's bridging a huge gap. So it's basically like a third support in the center, but it's not as thick. So the infill would not be the same as what your original part would be. It would probably be a little bit less because you want to remove that material after you're done printing. So it would print as your print is printing, and then it would hopefully, you know, close that gap in between. And then you could just snap it right off and remove it. And, you know, even save that, you know, that infill that you're, you know, instead of throwing away, you could save it, because there's actually devices that we even have in the lab where you can actually crush up, you know, say PLA or any material, and spool, you know, the excess material that you have. So you can almost, it's almost like you can pretty much recycle the prints that you have over time, and, you know, get like almost like a free spool out of it. Next would be adhesion. I would highly, highly, highly recommend hitting that button on adhesion. I use it a lot. You don't have to use it for every single print, but for the majority of prints, I would recommend using it. I remember when I first started over the summer with my printer at home, I used a lot of things. I tried a lot of things like glue. I tried masking tape. I did not try hairspray, thank God. I made sure, you know, I experimented with them a little bit, and I found out that over time, it, you know, people recommended it as like being the fix to that, to getting your print to stick to the bed. But over time, I didn't like having to use adhesives, because, you know, say you have a heated bed of, you know, 65 degrees Celsius, or, you know, 60 degrees Celsius. I don't know if that is in Fahrenheit, but it's obviously hot. So, you know, you got adhesives melting on there, and I don't think it's really the best alternative. So this kind of solves that issue. You pretty much print like a filled in perimeter layer first, and then you print your model on top. So it makes it pretty much stick with the filament that you have. It makes things a lot easier. So now I'm going to go into you know, just a little bit more in depth of all the other settings that are currently there. I'm not really going to, you know, list everything, but I'm just going to go over what I think is really important when starting out. So obviously we mentioned layer height. You could also access that here for quality. Shell. So shell is, you know, pretty important. Like I mentioned before with the 0% infill, like a soccer ball, you know, you can determine that wall thickness, how thick you want that wall for the soccer ball. You can change that setting here. How many, you know, how many layers of that soccer ball do you want? Like, it's almost like a soccer ball in a soccer ball, with like real close together though, or almost like cardstock in a sense, I guess. Another thing that's really important that I recently used actually for the model that I'm going to show you guys, that's right here, is you know, top and bottom thickness. So the one thing is top layers is you can actually shave off layers of your model to not print on the top or the bottom. So these were actually solid cubes. If you can see right here with my fingers, these were solid cubes. You couldn't actually see these infills right here. So what I did was I took the top layers and I hit 0 on that. So that just took the top layer completely off. Whatever layer was on top, eliminate it, and that way you could actually see inside the model. So with the settings, you can tweak things to get what you want, or what you're expecting to do with your models. So infill, I already went over, you know, infill density, but I'm going to go over, you know, infill patterns. So there's a lot of different patterns. Right now, the one I currently am going to show in this model is grid lines. There's obviously, you know, from seeing on the screen, there's a lot more infills that you can use. I haven't tried them all, but I do remember watching a few videos that said that some infills you actually can compress models a little bit, so they give them a little bit of a flex, even though it's PLA and not really a flexible filament. There's other models that actually increase the strength. It obviously depends on, you know, how you're printing it and what type of part. You know, different infill, I guess, patterns will also increase the time, depending on how they're printing, you know, and the complexity of them. But for the most part, I would stick with just grid for now. It's pretty much like the standard one. So materials, yeah, I'm not too sure why that tab's not working, so I'm just going to skip over it. So print speed, you could actually adjust how fast the printer is actually laying down the material. I'd recommend not touching that when starting out. It's pretty much already calibrated for you, the right speed. Obviously, if you're doing a more complex part and you really want the printer to take its time, you know, laying out the material, then maybe you want to slow it down, or maybe you're in a rush and you really want to prototype something fast. Maybe increasing the speed might be your option if your printer can handle it. You obviously would have to test it out in there first. So travel, I haven't really played around with these settings, but the one that I have seen before is enable retraction. I believe that's when, so pretty much if you use filament that's exposed to air, it does get moisture in it over time. and I've had this at home with my own printer. If you're printing out, say, 2 pegs or 2 prongs coming up, your printer would go in between the two, and it would actually leave strings in between if there's moisture inside the printer, inside the filament. And one thing this does is it kind of eliminates that just a little bit. I'm not sure how, but I was going to look more into it. But it does help with that. It does reduce the amount of strings that you do see. Another thing is cooling. So, on the extruder itself, where the hot end is, there is a fan, a computer fan that is coming down and cooling down the nozzle and also the interior component. I would recommend just leaving that alone and not really touching that. Next is support. So, you could obviously generate support everywhere. You could do types of angles and stuff. There's a lot more to it. I recommend just leaving it as general, whatever's set right now, because it seems to do the job when you're loading up a print. Obviously, if you're doing something more complex, you might need a little bit of a different type of support. I remember in the last edition of Cura, I think there was something called a tree support, where say you had instead of it coming, I believe it was something that came out of the bottom. So it would come at the bottom and then go up into a model, and almost like a tree branch, it would go and touch something in the model, and it would prevent it from overhanging and stuff like that. Next is build plate adhesion. So I'll show you once we slice the model what that exactly is. So right now there's only 3 different types. There's skirt, brim, and raft. They all look different, but for now I'm just going to show you brim because that's the most standard one that I like to use. And dual extrusion, we obviously don't have that on the CR10 2 Plus, but we do have a CR10. Oh no, I'm sorry, not CR10. Ultimaker 2 Plus. We do have an Ultimaker 3, which does have dual extrusion. So you can 3D print 2 different colors at once, and you could probably specify, where that is and where you want the 2 different colors to print. It's definitely not in my budget, that printer, but it would be nice to have one of those. So, so now I'm going to just slice the model for you guys. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So it takes not too long to slice. So as of right now, it's going to take about 42 minutes for this little model, and you're probably thinking that's a lot of time. Well, ways that you could reduce the time is obviously change the amount of infill. So if I were to change this to about or go back in the settings and change this to, let's say instead of 15, let's go to 5, and then reslice. It might change it down to, okay, well, sometimes it depends, obviously. It would probably work for a lot bigger models. It would reduce the time. But if it's something small like this, it's obviously going to vary per thing. I notice the smaller the model is, the infill really doesn't matter because it's still going to print it anyway. So right now it's 3 grams. It does tell you how much weight you're going to have, and it tells you how much length of the filament you're going to be using out of the spool. One thing that I would keep in mind is that there's about, I believe 1 filament roll is 1 kilogram, so that's about 1,000 grams, and that comes out to about 2.2 pounds. So, the feature right here is really good when, say if you have your own printer, just to keep track of how much you're using. I like to do that just so that way you get a sense of, when you're going to run out, or maybe, if you're going to do the next print, and say you don't have enough filament, you could also get a scale at home if you have one and weigh your actual filament roll and, just see how much you have on there if you have enough. So we're going to click preview so we could get a look at the model. And I'm just going to show you guys real quick. You actually can see an x-ray of the inside of the model. So if you guys have any more complex designs on the inside of something, you could obviously see through the model, see them. Now this is going to be the most standard view, which is layer height view. Or layer view, my bad. And right here on the right hand side, you can see the process of it printing. So layer by layer, you can go down. As you can see, those lines right there, the little crisscross pattern, that's the infill. That's how much it's going to be filled on the inside. So as you can see, as I'm going down, it's reducing down. And I'm going to show you guys right now on the bottom of the screen. This feature is actually kind of cool. You could actually see as the printer's printing the path that it's going to follow with the extruder head. And you could speed this up just to see where exactly the head's going to be and if there's going to be any conflicts in your print. So you can almost check your prints before you even do it. So this whole layer right here, this first layer, that's called the brim. This is what I was talking about with that adhesion. It helps stick it to the bed. And then when you go to the second layer, let me move this. And by the way, also down here, you could change the views. of looking at your print. And one thing that I would recommend is camera, I think it was camera position front end, and then if you change view to orthographic, it actually lays it flat. And then one thing also that I found out, if you hit shift and then right click, it makes it easier to move your mouse around the screen. So you can actually view it as it's going to come up layer by layer, just to see that. See if there's any conflicts with the print. So, so yeah, and then, you know, the next step would obviously be to export this. It's going to say, you know, UM2 for Ultimaker, and then this will export as a G-code file. So it's not the same as an STL. So pretty much a G-code file is the instructions that the printer uses to, you know, actually, you know, map out your model and create it. So if you were to use a CR10, it would be CR and then 10 and then pumpkin. So, okay, I'm just going to close out of this. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. That's pretty much Cura in a nutshell. It's it takes a little bit of getting used to, but as you get more familiar with it and, you know, you test it out with your own models, you'll be able to get a feel for it and see really, you know, do I need 100% density or do I need, you know, maybe 50%? It honestly depends what you're doing. And if you're prototyping, you probably want less infill. And if you're, you know, want a solid model, you probably want 100%. There's a lot of things that you can do, and you know, a lot of things you can test in that software. So right now, what I have here on the screen is all the different types of infills, just going up in numbers. So we have 0% infill. Obviously, there's nothing there. We have 5%. So I'm just gonna try to show you guys these. Move these up just a little bit. Okay, just put these here. So as you guys can see, it does get a little more structured on the inside as it's going. And as you increase the infill, getting more of a solid part. So there's less room for it to crack, to break, to fracture, anything. And then as you go higher, this is a 25, you know, 30, 35, 40, 50. And then at the top here, I'll take these out, make it easier to show. Then we have 60% infill, 70%. I'm just going to skip over and just show you 90 and 100. So then you can really see the fine detail. So you can see one's a little darker than the other because that's, you can see there's little pores going through there. So that's 90 to the left and 100 to the right. One other useful thing that we kind of discovered when I was printing out something for a test model was that one of our failed prints actually gave us a little demonstration tool. So this was supposed to be a solid cat with about 25% infill, I would say. So it did fail. We're still trying to figure out why, and we believe it's the printer, not really necessarily the software end. But yeah, you can actually see the outline of what the infill looks like. So you can see that the less it is, the more squishy it is on the inside. And just, you know, you could get a feel. It almost looks like one of those wafer cookies a little bit. So now just one last model that I'm going to show. Oh, and yeah, also this is the model of the cat when we fixed the printer. We actually redid it, so it's a lot more solid. And I think we increased the infill about 30%. So you could really take a look at the before and afters. You know, this is like what's on the inside. Obviously, it's not going to be, you know, that jumbled up, but this is what a solid model looks like. There's not really much room for it to break or to snap. So one more model that I'd like to show you guys is actually what we used previously for our ASME, WIE, and 3D PC workshop for Solidworks. So it was the class that you guys went to on Monday and Wednesday, I believe. This was actually the bottom half of the model you guys did. So this is the rotating part. So as you can see, you can actually make parts that fit together, and this was printed all in one print. It wasn't two separate pieces, so you can fit your tolerances together, so that way you can have a solid piece that actually rotates, or anything really that sticks together to itself. So this is what we'll be using actually for your pencil holders that you guys designed. this is just the bottom half, just to show you guys that it is possible to print one solid print with a design that you have. And yeah, so that's just a rundown of Cura, a rundown of everything that we have. So yeah, if you guys have any questions about, you know, either 3D printing or the models that you guys designed, or you know, anything about the events that you guys saw, or maybe if you guys have even suggestions on how we can improve this, because, you know, currently everything's kind of virtual right now, so it's a little hard to, you know, try to get people in person. But hopefully, you know, in the future we'll be able to all do this in person, and, you know, really get to meet you guys and teach you guys how Onshape and you know, 3D printing and, you know, just Cura and everything. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the email. And also, if you have questions about the Rowan 3D Printing Club, since we are a little bit of a new club, I'll put that email in there too. So yeah, feel free to shoot us an email. We also have executive board positions open. So if you guys are interested in joining the club, you know, feel free to let us know. We'd be more than happy to schedule a meeting with you guys. And yeah, so I'd like to thank you guys for having me. And yeah, so okay, have a good one and take care.